All right, so I was watching an Asmongold video about the DC cleanup. The whole there's so much to talk about here, and I'm only going to scratch the surface. I'm not doing a deep dive into like Trump's policies in DC and bringing the National Guard in and taking over control of the city with the federal government. Obviously, when it comes to actual policy and kind of what this means, precedents it sets, whether it's justified. I mean, there's just so many details that I am not nearly knowledgeable enough to comment on. So I'm just going to sort of talk about one or two aspects of kind of Trump's strategy, which is part politics and part like give the people what they want. And this applies equally to I think his immigration policy. Now I'm generally speaking, like I am not I'm not anti-police, but I'm not pro like police state. Like I think we have a major problem with privatized prisons. I think we have a major problem with too many people going to prison. I think there's too many nonviolent offenders in prison. I think that we have dropped the ball when it comes to, helping people with recovery, addiction recovery, when it comes to mental health, and getting people put into state of the art and well-funded mental health facilities. And there's so many other areas where I think we can handle problems with crime by handling other problems with poverty, problems with education, and so on and so forth. At the same time, I think that the Democrats and the left in general have really kind of gone so far in this other direction where where things like homelessness, which now we're supposed to call people unhoused, which I find insulting to homeless people, because a lot of homeless people were not housed to begin with. I think that you could refer to a certain niche as unhoused, people who maybe lost their job, and because there are shitty safety nets in this country, they lost their house, and now they are more than likely temporarily homeless or unhoused. That makes sense. But for a lot of homeless people in the country that are chronically homeless, that choose to be homeless, maybe that deal with, lifelong mental health issues or drug addiction or many other things, those are not unhoused people. And I think it's just such a bullshit social signaling, like virtue signaling thing to use terms like that to describe people in an inaccurate way. And a lot of what I would say the problems with sort of left-wing policy towards crime and immigration in this country are sort of rooted in this idea of we need to be compassionate, but and there's this almost like a toxic empathy at play where we need to always be compassionate, and we need to show off how compassionate we are, even if like everyday people, not just white people, but also black people, Hispanic people, everyday people, business owners, workers, professionals, all kinds of people are bothered when they, for instance, walk around the corner and there's this park that the city has put in, and they've spent millions of dollars building this nice park for you to bring your family and, take your kids to swing and have a picnic. And now there are 40 tents set up in this park. And people are using needles, and there are sexual assaults taking place, and it smells like shit, and it's dangerous and sketchy. Now, I'm from Arizona, and I had never seen a tent city before. I mean, maybe they have them. I don't know. There's probably some tent cities in Phoenix somewhere, but they're just not as prevalent or obvious here as in other places. For instance, I think the first time I really encountered a for real legit tent city was when I went to Seattle several years ago. This was kind of at the end of the pandemic. My girlfriend at the time and I went to Seattle because I lived in that city when I was like 2, and I love the Northwest, and we wanted to go explore kind of the national parks over nearby there. And we went to Seattle, and just driving through the city from the airport to where we were staying was like revelatory. I could not believe how many tents I saw, by the side of the road in parks. And that's just on the drive. And I'd heard from people on social media, like on Twitter and whatnot, like, be careful, Seattle's dangerous now. And I always kind of, I don't pay that. I mean, I'm always like safe when I go out. I'm not like one of those chicks who jogs with earbuds in, like by themselves in a city with cars and muggers and shit. Like, that's crazy. Why do you do that? Don't do that. Like, have some self-preservation, people. But I'm always like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm never really afraid. Probably because I'm this big guy and people just generally don't fuck with me. But I felt sketched out walking around Seattle. Like I remember just walking around and and it would all be fine. And you'd go around a corner and then there's another park and there's another 20 tent set up and there's super shady people. And I mean, like, I want to be compassionate too. I want to be compassionate for homeless people who a lot of them do have mental health issues or, there's some generational poverty at play or there's drug addiction or there's all of the above, PTSD, all kinds of things, runaways, abuse. There's so many, like, it's just such a soup of bad shit that goes into this. But like my experience in Seattle and my previous experiences in like San Francisco, prior to the pandemic, I haven't been to San Francisco since the pandemic, but like those, this is not a healthy way to address homelessness. It's not compassionate to just let people set up tents in parks and let the city just go to shit. This doesn't help anybody. And generally speaking, one of the things that I find the most insulting about this is rich people, the rich liberals who run cities like Seattle, they live in suburbs, nice suburbs that are far away from this problem. Poor working class people are where these tent cities are generally being set up in neighborhoods where people don't have money and aren't making the decisions in the halls of power, right? So these things really impact, not the people making these calls to just let these tent cities flourish, I guess, if that's the word to describe a tent city. When I went to DC last year, I actually didn't see anything like that. So this is surprising to me that I mean, obviously I didn't go all around the city. There's obviously neighborhoods where this is a clear problem in DC. I know DC, though, is not anywhere close to one of the worst cities in the United States when it comes to crime or homelessness. But obviously there's a problem there. But I walked from my hotel all the way to the Capitol and then to the White House and through like Georgetown. I walked all around DC, like the Lincoln Memorial, this huge loop. It took me like 3.5 hours and it was hot and muggy. I was so sweaty and I felt like so gross by the end of that walk, but I didn't see anything sketchy. So I don't know. Like obviously I keep saying obviously, I'm sorry, but there's clearly problem areas in the city, just like in any city. And I think that like so much of this blight of tent cities is just such an eyesore, right? People see this and they think this is a real problem, and they should, because you shouldn't have parks overrun with people using needles and committing crimes, and it's dangerous for you and your family, your children, to be around that. And it's dangerous for the people living in those tent cities. I mean, these are places. I mean, I remember when like Seattle was taken over by all the protesters, and they like created their own little like utopian dystopian block or whatever. I can't remember what they called it. Some stupid shit. But there was like violent crimes and rape and shit going on in there. Like the lawlessness. Like I'm not against anarchy as a philosophy. I always liked Tolkien's or how Tolkien's philosophy has been interpreted as sort of like a minarchist society where there's like a distant king who and the Shire has their king, right? But he's far away and they sort of rule themselves. Like, I'm okay with that kind of thing. Anarchy in theory, but anarchy in practice in the way that, like, we're going to set up this protest zone where there's no cops allowed and the city's just going to let us do it. Like, what the fuck do you think is going to happen? And that's sort of like I want a society where there's less, like, where we don't need to be as tough on crime all the time. Like, I think that's such a showboating thing for Republicans, and for, we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to have 3 strikes rules, and then we're going to put people in prison for 20 years. Like, I don't think that works, but I also think you can't just ignore things like like violent crime. You can't just ignore tent cities. You can't just say, well, this is the compassionate thing to do. We're just going to, in my hometown, there's been multiple ballots, like ballot initiatives or politicians who've tried to allow camping within city limits is what it's been framed as, which sounds, I guess, kind of like no big deal when you don't think about it too much. Like when you're like, oh, camping within city limits. Okay. Like so we can have campsites where people go with their barbecues and like set up no, it's to allow homeless people to set up quasi-permanent residences on sidewalks and at parks where our kids play. You can't just allow that shit to happen and not expect some sort of backlash. And then that backlash leads to someone like Trump, who, he's listening to all the sort of middle America types and plenty of like business owners and regular people who are like, I'm tired of having, I'm tired of feeling unsafe in my city. I'm tired of having this and that and that and this. I'm tired of gangs operating here from across the border. And it's really hard at that point to start separating fact from fiction and rumor and everything else, because now there's this clear picture of what's going on, and whatever the reality is, whatever the stats are. I mean, overall, and I've said this so many times when I've talked about, people are always saying, well, these video games create violence. And I'm always like, no, they don't. For one thing, if you look at the numbers, overall, violent crime is down. Violent crime is down. You can chart the line showing violent crime dropping as more and more people play video games. Now, I'm not saying that playing video games makes violent crime go down, but I'm also not saying it doesn't, because like if people have shit to do with their time, they might be less likely to commit crimes. And sort of big picture, I guess, I think it's like you can just look at this, oh, they're cleaning up DC. But in the bigger picture, even though I do think we do need to clean up 10 cities and we do need to clean up this and that, and in the bigger picture, it's not going away. I mean, we've been fighting the war on drugs for decades now. Drugs are still here. You can fight crime by locking people up, but people are still going to commit crimes because the underlying issues are not going away. And how do you solve those? And I think that's where, it's easy to lose sight of kind of a more important conversation. I mean, I'm not saying, obviously these are both important conversations, but I think if we don't address like how are we going to get people an education? How are we going to get people good jobs? How do we lift people out of poverty into the middle class? If we don't have an economic upward mobility in our society, there will be crime, because there will be poverty, and because there's money to be made in crime. I mean, that's all there is to it. And of course, like, you can get into a huge debate. Does that mean more government spending? Does that mean better safety nets? Does that mean less government? Is government the problem? I mean, we can have a debate about what that means, but if you only look at crime as a thing to clean up, you're never going to solve the problem with crime. You're also not going to solve it by just ignoring very obvious problems. And, you see this in Philadelphia, you see this in Baltimore, you see it all over, where homelessness, drug abuse, violent crime, there's clearly a great deal that needs to be done. But when I see what's going on in DC, it's hard for me. I see like clearly there's a problem and it's been ignored and it needs to be solved. But also, what's going on there now? Is that going to do it? Or is this just a very, very big show of force? And once the media frenzy has died down and the National Guard is sent away and the federal government gets tired of, walking around with their dicks out, then it goes back to the police in DC working a bunch of overtime, underfunded, and like every other city. I'm probably a little biased here because I just finished watching The Wire. I also just finished watching The Shield. But before that, I watched The Wire. Both shows I'd never seen before. Late to the party. But The Wire was so good, and I think it's so interesting because that show really, it's so much about how like this city of Baltimore has all these problems and people keep coming in to try to fix them, but the problems are so ingrained and so much part of the landscape, so much part of the city itself, that no matter who it is, whether it's these cops running a wire on the criminals, whether it's this, it's Bunny who's trying to create his own little Amsterdam and legalize drugs, whether it's the young bright-eyed bushy-tailed mayor who wins the election but then quickly falls victim to the very same system that he's been fighting against, whether it's a new administration coming in and changing policies from the top down, whether it's the fact that they have to cut all sorts of funding to the police because they got to fund the schools, or whatever hot button topic it is. Like, it's really hard to actually foment change that's lasting. And so I generally just don't trust any politician. I certainly don't trust that whatever's going on in DC now is actually going to clean up DC. Like watching the Asmongold video, he's laughing because, he's watching a video of this middle-aged black guy who's walking around and he's like, these streets are so nice and peaceful. Like, look at this. I don't smell weed. I don't see any, there's nobody, causing disruptions. And it's like, that's cool. Like the cavalry was sent in and all the problem children were rounded up. But let's talk in 3 months. Let's talk a year from now. What's it going to be like? And my guess, albeit a cynical one, I'd say maybe a realistic one. Gotta have that realism. My guess is that it won't be very much different than it was a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. Because these things don't change just because you have a show of force. They change because you have to have huge, widespread changes throughout society. And the most important change you can have in a society is an economic change where more people are able to become part of a flourishing economic reality. The more people you can get out of poverty and into the middle class, the less crime you will have. That's it. And it's really hard to do in a country like ours, which is huge, has a huge population, a very diverse population. One part of the country is totally different than another. One population in the country is totally different than another. I think we have lots of unifying cultural factors that do bring us all together as Americans, but I think it's a hugely difficult problem. Nothing like, the Nordic countries, which, generally, people point to the Nordic countries or to Japan or, as these places with lower crime and more, they're higher on the happiness index and all this stuff. It's just much harder to do in a country the size and nature of the United States of America. So, what's my point? My point is that the Democrats really dropped the ball on immigration and crime. Even if a lot of it is perception, a lot of it is also reality. I think if you want to have a better immigration policy, you need to have a fucking policy. And it can't just be like, everyone's welcome. In an ideal world where anarchy works, that would be great. But it's just not ideal here. But there are lots of reasons to have immigration, right? I mean, for one, the rate of replacement. You need to continually re-up the population. If you fall below the rate of replacement, all the sort of social programs we have, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all these things, are going to collapse. And our economic future is in dire straits without more babies. And immigrants are, a great way to solve a big chunk of that problem. But not just willy-nilly, like anything goes. There needs to be a policy. And crime in these cities. Like, you can't just be like, oh, it's cool. We're just going to let it go. You go into some of these neighborhoods and you're going to die, but it's cool. We're going to just let it go. Because the backlash, you have reactions to that. Reactionary politics are driven by this sort of thing. And that leads to the grandstanding and other bullshit we see and another Band-Aid that doesn't fix the problem, because neither of these parties actually have any real plan to solve these problems, which is why so often we see presidents just turn to foreign policy and a bunch of other bullshit to pass their 4 years in office. By the way, I was watching a little bit of that Trump press conference, and while I do think he's still pretty sharp, he looks really old. I could not believe it. I don't think I've watched him speak for months now. I put my head in the sand and I ignore it all. But he looked really old. He really reminded me kind of like my grandparents too, and like some of their friends when I was a kid. Just the way he talks, and like I can really see how his cultural appeal to older people is so strong, because it just really reminded me of a whole group of people that I grew up around when I was a kid in Montana. But he looks old. we should maybe stop electing such old men to the highest office in the land. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. I know this is very rambling. I want to do more politics, culture stuff. I can't settle on like one topic to do here. Like, I like to do my TV show reviews. I like to talk about video games and movies and all that, but I also really like to talk about the culture wars and politics. So I'm just going to keep doing all of it. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Peace.